is that Sign is a technology business incubator which is hosted by IIT Bombay, and it was established back in 2004 to and it also provides start to scale support to startups, innovators, entrepreneurs, researchers, faculty members who would like to who would like to explore this entrepreneurial journey. So sign if you have a good idea which can generate a IP, create an IP, or have a social impact, please approach Sign. Please contact Sign team, and then we'll help you to convert this idea into tangible or intangible, technology or a product, and we'll help you to take it to the market with the help of different supports, mentor support, the investors in Sign network and all that. With the help of them, will help you to take that thing, take your ideas to the market. So that is briefly about Sign, and we have also a lot of programs from government, different government departments like DST and DBT. We will also briefly talk about them towards the end of the session. But and one of the program, that is Biotechnology Ignition Grant from BIRAC. We will probably, our speaker will address some of the questions which will address how to avail that sort of a funding from such government departments, and also I'll not go in details in that. So now moving to our today's para session. This is our third session under the Sign Power Hour Biotech series. So we have started this series in June month, and this is our third session. And in this series, we intend to bring various speakers from different domains of biology to address, recent advances, startup opportunities, and funding available. And today today's session is on one of the important topic, Indian industrial biotechnology landscape and funding opportunities, and how this will create an opportunity for different, innovators, entrepreneurs, uh, 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 cre- uh, create employment in industrial biotechnology area using synthetic biology and all that. So that our today's speakers will address that shortly. And for this session, we have invited Dr. Sriram Raghavan, who is a very well-known and successful entrepreneur scientist. I'll briefly introduce Dr. Sriram Raghavan and hand over the session to him so that he can drive this session and tell you about all the opportunities in this domain. So Dr. Sriram Raghavan is presently the Senior Vice President at Janunam. It is India's first company to offer synthetic biology as a service. And the company provides the niche services in deep science innovation, biomolecular engineering. He has over 2 decades of experience in building 6 startups in life science and operated in 28 countries around the world. And he is also a founder of 2 other startups. One is a California-based company, Eliva Biotherapeutics, working on the world's first program, live biotherapeutics for lung cancer, and another Indian company, that is Natural Nutrition for vegan meal replacer as a convenience food for millennials of the world. He was previously a vice president at the Swiss headquarter synthetic biology company Evolva Biotech, and this company was was involved in providing the products that can contribute to the health, well-being, and sensory enjoyment. He also lends his support to more than 60 startups along the east coast of India, and he advises startup in many technology incubators in India. He's also on board of some of the investment committee with the incubators. And to tell you about his background, educational background, he has a master's in biochemical engineering, MPhil and PhD in computational system biology. He has done his MBA in international business with focus on transfer pricing for biotechnology intangibles, which is a certified and he is a certified key executive professional from Harvard Business School in Boston, USA. So he has not just worked with startups and all that, but he has also worked with the Confederation of Indian Industry (CII) to help the government of Tamil Nadu to formulate biotech policy, and he was also part of the Biopharma Vision 2020, the team which laid out the biopharma strategy for the country, which was submitted to Department of Pharma, Government of India. So he has expertise in affordable innovation across life science sectors, discovery informatics, diagnostic, pharmaceutical, nutraceutical, cosmeceutical, personal care, so on and so forth. Uh, so with this brief introduction, I hand over the session to Dr. Sriram Raghavan so that he can drive the session and give you all the information related to this domain. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pranita, for that excellent and very detailed introduction. And I also want to thank your team at Sign, because I think all of you focus, in terms of what do you call, helping startups in a very big way. And I think the intent with which you folks work there, which I know personally, which I've seen, I think is fantastic. So I'm very sure that Sign would really come up in a great way in terms of the life sciences sector, because I know that you are also helping other sectors. But I think from life science perspectives, it's very important to have Sign on board in terms of what you are doing for other areas. So with that, I want to thank you, and then we'll straight away go into my slide so that I can share, and then I'll go off video a bit so that I save my bandwidth, and then I share my screen. So Pranita, you just have to tell me if my screen is visible.
Yes, sir. Yeah, your screen is.
Yeah, great. So, okay, there'll be one video in between, so I'll have to, there'll be a pause there, but otherwise rest should be fine. So today, as requested by Sign, I think I'm just trying to give an introduction of two areas. One is on the synthetic biology in terms of industrial biotechnology landscape. The second is more in terms of the funding avenues for the aspiring biotechnology entrepreneurs. So more about myself on the LinkedIn, but I'm just going to give you a brief about myself. The reason is because later on in the Q&A session, you will figure out some of our answers is going to be on this. So if you see my range in which what I've worked on is from biodefense to theranostics, flavors and fragrances, but also into newer areas like aircraft and submarine polymers, biofouling for ships, astrobiology, Formula One racing cars, UAV jet fuels. So the reason why that is important is because life sciences, many of us tend to have a very limited worldview, and the idea is to see that, the idea is to expand that horizon. But in the 20 years that I've been in this field so far, I have been, working with 6 companies, many of which I co-founded in 28 countries. But it is very important to put my failures there, because I learned more from my failures, because obviously financially I've lost, much there. And then the best, one of the best successful company I've returned 22 times returns to the investor. So the reason why I'm saying that is because entrepreneurship is a risky game. So one has to have the skin in the game if you're really up to it. So it's not another, converted form of an academic or any other less risky venture. So this is a serious business. So right now I'm working with 3 startups. Again, this is very important because for the first time, we are trying to use one of the core technology element like synthetic biology as a service. So we call it SaaS, not a software as a service, but synthetic biology as a service. And this is India's first company to do so. The reason why we wanted to try this model is we want to see how far a company of this kind of a core or high-tech technology in India can be successful from a services perspective, because we are all focusing on IP all the time in life sciences. So we do, IP work for our customer, but the idea is to do it service so that we don't raise money and at the same time the company is revenue generating. So that's a kind of an experiment, and so far we've been successful. And Eli Biotherapeutics is out and out an American company, and it's fundamentally programming a bug in terms of circuits. Essentially, we put all the genes to produce a drug. So essentially, the bug goes inside the lung. It produces the actual compound. We have all the genes to produce that compound inside the bug onto the small cell lung cancer. But what is important is it's got all the circuits in it so that it controls the expression of the drug. So that's again first of its kind from programmed life biotherapeutics perspective. And Genome Natural Nutrition is more from a vegan perspective that we have actually started. This is very different. But the common thread connecting all the 3 companies is basically microbe. So even in Genome Natural Nutrition, the idea is to prepare a vegan full meal replacer that would have microbiota accessible carbohydrates. Essentially, these are called MACs that actually you don't get to digest, but your microbe inside you get to digest them. And thereby it influences the gut-brain axis, gut-lung axis, gut-immune axis, so on and so forth. Now, of course, other than that, I also advise other companies across different incubators, and I also support ABLE. And that ABLE is very important because those of you who may not know, so that's one of the country's leading biotech association. And if you're not a member, try being a member, because then you are in the network. You will know many different things, including investment avenues as well. Now, before we get into synthetic biology as a whole, we have to understand this. Today, whatever product that you consume, the clothes that you wear, the food that you eat, whatever that you can think of, they are fundamentally from three different sources. The first one is we either extract them directly from nature. For instance, we take oleoresins. Oleoresins are the extracts, like for example, for flavors, etc., from plants, or we refine from natural sources like petroleum crude. Or let's say we actually work with cotton and silk from plants and insects, essentially something got to do with nature directly. So the second is basically in terms of chemical synthesis, we make, for example, plastic or even pharmaceuticals, which are 100% chemically made today. And then the third route is more in terms of fermentation. But this is either a native fermentation or a recombinant organisms. For example, if you want to make a hormone, it's fundamentally a recombinant organism, and you actually ferment it. And a conventional fermentation is nothing but, let's say, brewing ethanol. And there are various other antibiotics that we also conventionally ferment and get it out. These are three broadly, the possible routes with which we produce products today. But then there are some issues associated with each of them. So what are the issues that we have? If you really look at extraction, it's not renewable. Obviously, all of you know this. It leads to loss of biodiversity, natural resources. Obviously, you need to have more water and space, etc. And also there is batch-to-batch variation. So product inconsistency, it's very difficult to do a standardization, quality check. Now, chemical production, the problem is probably less than 2% of what nature has provided us is what is all is accessible from a chemistry perspective. Chemistry has a long way to go. And many times the chemistry is very complex, and also separation and purification is very expensive. And also, more importantly, we are now realizing that most of the chemical processes have got negative impact on carbon and water footprint. Water footprint is something very important that we're going to see later on. And of course, we also need biodegradable products, which chemistry industries at this point of time, they can, but at least from a commercial perspective, it's not too many at this point of time. Now, fermentation, the issue is it's presently restricted to conventional classical fermented products, which means if a bacteria is actually producing antibiotic, you basically grow the bug in large scale. If you're going to, let's say, engineer a bug, you basically engineer a human cell or an insect cell, or let's say a plant cell with one or more genes, but that's specifically to produce a large molecule like a protein, etc. But the issue with this, in terms of engineered ones, is it's expensive to scale up. So is there a solution to all of this? So let's see with a video. It'll give me a minute because I'm going to play.
Cotton, trees, and bamboo are raw materials used as textiles. All are grown from the earth, require sunshine, water, fertilizers, and may require pesticides. By comparing microbial cellulose by nanulose to the cotton, trees, and bamboo, using a ratio called field to yield, we begin to see the immense benefits of the nanulose technology. If we compare these crops using a standard soccer pitch as a standardized growth area, we begin to see the yield efficiency of each crop. The cotton field is harvested in 6 to 8 months and yields approximately 500 kilograms of raw cotton. The tree field is harvested in 12 to 18 years and yields approximately 3,500 kilograms of cellulose pulp. The bamboo field is harvested in 3 to 7 years and yields approximately 12,000 kilograms of cellulose pulp. The field of microbial cellulose is harvested in 10 to 15 days with a yield of 115 tons of cellulose pulp. Microbial cellulose is a unique material. It grows through natural fermentation and does not require earth, sunshine, fertilizers, pesticides, or large amounts of water, and can be grown all year round, eliminating the need for crop seasons. It can be fermented in liquid waste streams from food and beverage sectors. The fermentation process produces pure cellulose without the problematic hemicellulose or lignin, so there is no need for the crafting process. In addition, microbial cellulose can be grown vertically, compounding the yield returns over the same crop area. Microbial cellulose has a significant yield to field advantage.
So what this, the key takeaway message from this is that if you're using a microbial engineered process, you actually save a lot of, in terms of the nature, in terms of field to yield ratio that you'd have seen. But moving on, in terms of what nature has got to offer to us, most of the drugs that we see are from nature. So, more than 60% of the drugs have come from nature. But the problem is nature doesn't provide all for our own cells, for all the humans. So obviously the quantity is going to be small. So we can obviously make it using chemistry, but then many times we have to extract them from nature. For example, if you look at the most recent drugs, many of them are from corals. So the question that comes there is like, are we going to use nature? So typically a coral takes millions of years to form. Are we going to mine them for our own self, or is there any other way out? So from that perspective, synthetic biology has emerged as a really interesting solution where we can actually address many of these challenges. So synthetic biology is at a point where very similar to how semiconductor industry was long back. Essentially, that's because of the Moore's law. So many of you may be aware what Moore's law did in terms of the number of transistors that you can put on the chip. So what is propelling this Moore's law here for synthetic biology is the cost of gene synthesis in terms of dollars per base. So as you can see in the graph there, it's actually going lesser and lesser. So that's, I think, more or less the graph is very similar to Moore's law. So as and when that actually cost comes down, you will see applications of synthetic biology really widening, because then you can actually engineer genes in a computer, stitch them together, put it in a microbial host, and then produce whatever you want to do. And not only that, now I think the investors are also realizing the significance of this particular technology. And that's why you see many of these companies doing successful in the US IPO listings as well. Of course, the applications can be very many in terms of health and nutraceuticals, etc. But what lies at the fundamental under the hood of synthetic biology technology is, let's say today, you see a lot of these natural ingredients that have got supply chain issues of scalability, inconsistency, etc. So what we can do to produce them instead of conventionally farming, because obviously you'll be running out of land and you need to have a lot of water and all of that. If you can actually move the genes of the key ingredients into a microbial host, and then you simply try to ferment it out. So essentially, instead of making an alcohol or ethanol, you tell your yeast or the microbial host to make vanilla, saffron, stevia, agar-wood, whatever that you want to do. So with this, the primary advantage is that you can actually make novel functional compounds. The reason why we are saying novel is because sometimes you want to, let's say, have a new compound, which is, let's say, new fragrance that's got a hybrid fragrance of both rose and jasmine. You can actually do it. And you can actually make it something functional, which is actually having UV blocker on many of those things. And you can make existing compounds in new ways. For example, saffron has been there from a farming perspective, but the demand is 35,000 metric tons. The supply is only 250 metric tons. So that's a huge supply mismatch gap. So you can actually make the same thing in a better or a much more improved way. Now, in terms of natural process, of course, there are many complex supply chain that is also involved in terms of farming and harvesting. And here we can actually overcome many of these things. So in terms of, it's got a better economics, safer, shorter, more stable routes, consistent product qualities, customizable blends. For example, if you want to make a specific fragrance or a flavor alone combined, and let's say you want to make a specific drink, you will be able to do it. Whereas in nature, it's very difficult to isolate everything. And of course, you can make better ingredients and new ingredients as well. Now, so this is what typically a metabolic pathway of yeast will look like. We call this yeast metro because we actually build this metabolic pathway, extend this pathway from different branches, very similar to how you build metro routes to get to various products. And that's how these products actually form. So of course, I can spend a separate session detailing how these things come. Let's say these are all the end products that you want to produce. And the inner circle that you see is fundamentally yeast and its metabolic pathway. The middle circle that has come up now is basically are the key ingredients, and the numbers in the outside the green circle indicates the number of steps or metabolic pathways that you need to engineer basic yeast to get to the final product, and those products can be used in various applications. So this is basically a 21st century brewing that we have got. You ferment it instead of alcohol, you actually get whatever product, you purify them, and then you basically ship it. Just as an example, you see on the fermenter, the picture that popped up, you see the kind of orange color stretch here where I'm highlighting. So that's the saffron that is actually growing in. For the first time, you see saffron in a fermenter. So, but let's come to the cost metrics of it. What areas will it be economical? Obviously, we can't go after large, commodity chemicals or fuels because that's not economical, at least as of today. So it's better to go after nutrition, consumer health, and pharma, because then that's something from the price to volume ratio is very attractive, because synthetic biology has also got some cost limitations. Now, just as an example, from the metabolic route perspective, from glucose we can make vanillin and maybe derivatives of it. But we can also make, anthocyanins, curcumin, etc. But then most importantly, gingerone and capsaicin, because seemingly to a normal eye, vanilla, chili, and ginger are three different things, but metabolically they are all connected. And of course, once you get these products, you can actually apply it into your cosmetics, into your consumer products. But why did that submarine pop up? Because we actually made a polymer using this technology to coat submarines. And of course, the same thing goes with the jets. So later on, I can explain in terms of what are these applications. And with respect to the Formula One racing, we actually had a rubber coating there in terms of ensuring that it's got a much more durability there. And why is the Sensodyne toothpaste there? Because one of our products is also there into the toothpaste, which is a key ingredient for the dental caries. So that's the kind of a summary that we have. And I'm moving on to the next area, which is basically the funding for life sciences business. Now here, there are a lot of things to be covered, but due to paucity of time, I'm going to simplify things in a very, just the core elements. We can have a later on a detailed session. Typically, this is basically following a Trinity principle. You see what the Trinity principle is. So most of the investor presentations will have 10, 20, 30 principle, in the sense it'll have 10 slides, 20 minutes, 30 font size bullet points. Of course, vitamin M, money is the most important. Most of the data, we keep it in the backup slides. So typically the talk is for three types of audiences. In this particular case, what we address is in terms of life sciences, biotech, and agri people, clinicians, practicing clinicians, and those who want to get into entrepreneurship. But let's see how to apply this Trinity principle in terms of addressing the key investor needs. I'm just going to present the funding avenues in the same format so that you get an example in terms of how we actually work. So for example, I've given a topic title there, and I've actually put three different contents in each slide so that you get to see. So 3CME is my term for three different limits which differentiate biotechnology businesses from other business. One is they're capital intensive, consumables are very expensive, and the electricity costs are very aggressive. So that makes this business very different. But then there are three different funding avenues to meet them if you play them well. So I've called this as 3 which is basically funding source. One is a grant, which is, obviously it's a free money. Then it's equity, where you exchange your ownership of the company, and you, of course, you borrow money from the bank. But remember, raising money involves, except grant, it's got some particular stake in this. You actually trade your equity, or obviously your percentage of dilution goes down. And similarly, in terms of your debt, you have to service the debt. So there are some catches there. Now, where would you get this grant? So we follow this 3P principle, wherein it's either you get it from a public institution or a private institution or a philanthropic institution. And from a public institution, you see, obviously you have state governments giving many of these small grants. And it's not much, but we can actually get things started off. So you can look at for your own state, what kind of grants are available and what are the requirements for it. But from Government of India, there are, of course, many different agencies. BAG is not the only thing. There are several other agencies that are there. If you really look around, right from Startup India, actually time to time, these things are published. And for example, this PRISM has got its own list as well. And in international avenues, you actually have various, impact grants. But what is important is you need to have social metrics that is very important for impact. Now, from other such examples that we can actually talk about is the private institutions, such as like Indian Oil Corporation. And of course, there are various other foundations, philanthropic foundations like Vadhwani Foundation. And of course, multinational foundations like Dell Foundation, Rockefeller, they are also actually working on beyond just Gates and Wellcome. And the main problem for these philanthropic institutions that they expect is that they actually want a very similar problem solution statement, very similar to a TED talk. If you can really prepare it, well and good. In terms of prize and competitions, there are several local and global competitive events. So it's very important that we actually participate in all of these. And many of the startup incubators are also supporting them. Fundamental thing that they look at it is sustainability, social impact, and scale are also important besides just innovation. Now, in terms of what are the sources of equity from institutional perspective, we have basically angels. We have many institutions giving seed funds, and many of the institutions basically are companies. For example, like Novartis or GSK, they have their own funds as well. But all of them have got some catch. For example, if you are going to look at angels networking, it's very important. You got to be members in many of these institutions. If it's going to be from other institutions like seed funds, etc., your team strength is something that they will check on. And if it's going to be from large institutions, your prior track record is important. Now, in terms of debt, obviously, you have to look at individuals. Trust is very important. Private institutions you can go, but there are several banks. More importantly, interest sometimes is killing. And third is the public institutions like banks. SIDBI and NABARD are very, very convenient. If you have your POC ready, if you think you can actually scale it up reasonably well, if you can get your documentations right, I think these are agencies to go for. In terms of what are the three qualities that all of these guys expect from a scientist? One is, can a scientist sell? Because most of them are worried about it. Number two, can scientists speak up, communicate? Now, scientists are known to communicate amongst themselves, but can they really communicate to a wider audience? Number three is, can scientists stay bubbly? What that means is that when they're criticized, because obviously its customer is going to criticize and thrash the product. So will they be able to withstand the failure? And if these things, even if one of them is not there, don't need to worry. You can actually hire a team for it. You can focus on your work. But it's important, somebody has to have these elements when you're really looking at on entrepreneurship as a career. Now, what investor typically would, the standard three elements that they want is they actually want returns and exits. So how you really look at it is, imagine if you're going to put your own money, what's the returns you're going to look at it, when are you going to get the returns? And what is the time frame for it? Ideally is 5 years, but see what you can do. And then more importantly, if there is a degree of risk, how are you going to minimize it, like regulatory risk, etc. So it's very important to give a thought to all of these three things. But if you have noticed, I have put my slides in this particular thing as an example in terms of looking at the 10, 20, 30 principle as well. So anyway, so I end my talk very briefly here in terms of looking at local needs is very important. So, and I'm opening for answering any questions, and I'm stopping my slide share.
Okay. So I have a couple of questions, and we'll also, there are two people in the who raised their hand, so I'll unmute them. But just before I go to them, so a couple of questions from my side.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have talked about this, ecosystem. You are part of this ecosystem from such a long time. Do you think, sir, is this ecosystem is really mature enough for this particular domain?
Actually, it's a good question. Actually, the ecosystem is maturing. I wouldn't say it is fully mature. It is maturing. But the main issue, Pranita, is that we are not delivering, because many of the companies who have got the investment, they are not delivering fully to the extent that they are supposed to. So the issue that I see as an entrepreneur is to find the right talent who can deliver with core life sciences with frugal resources. That's very important. Now, while it might not match with the developed countries' ecosystem, but we have our own market opportunities if we plan and think the business well ahead before making the first move.
Okay, so when you mention that it is maturing, and so what do you mean by what do you expect from these researchers, maybe students who are graduating, completing their PhDs and all that, and they would like to take this entrepreneurial journey or road? What do you expect from them? How to prepare for this then?
It's a very simple thing. So imagine if there is no taxpayers' money available for research. Right now, all the researchers around the world are working with taxpayers' money. It is not their money for doing the research. Imagine if we have to invent something, do something, or work something with our own money. Typically think from a normal perspective. How would you go about it? So then the pain kicks in. Then it forces them to think innovatively, cost effectively, and then they actually completely can do magic with working with frugal resources. So many times, the common complaint that we have is that life sciences is resource hungry, but it's also that researchers are not really thinking, good enough in terms of how to use existing resources, network well with them, how to use, for example, all the BioNest, how to use the cluster effectively, and how to deliver something on time with very limited resources. So that's very important. Right now, I think that particular thinking process is not being really molded, maybe because we are all at blame for this, but I think we have not really molded or shaped that particular thought, the students right from the beginning. That's very important, Pranita, if they have to really deliver working as an entrepreneur.
Actually, it was question which I was actually planning to ask you towards the end, but since you are mentioned about the students now, so any any tips or any suggestions or guidance to these academic people, where I mean, we have received this question from the registration process, where one of the one of the professor was asking how we should actually go about mentoring these people to make them really ready for to work in this area, in this particular domain, not just in terms of taking up jobs, but creating employment through entrepreneurship.
See, whenever we talk about employment, whether it is entrepreneurship or working for someone, the main thing, Pranita, that we fail to teach students, for that matter even faculties, is finance. Why I'm saying that is because when we start up any work, we are excited so much about science, which is very good. But the question nobody is asking is, how much is it going to cost? What is the cost of capital? Let's say someone is going to give you that money to do that research. What is the cost of capital? First of all, what is meant by cost of capital? And what is the cost of capital? What is the percentage of interest that I'm paying in order to raise that money? Let's say if I'm going to put that research in 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years, or 10 years, calculate the cumulative interest of each of that year. And finally, what is the final amount of total money with interest is being spent on it? And what am I going to get in return? And how do I monetize it? If you really honestly ask, I haven't come across any institution which is teaching finance when somebody is actually embarking on life sciences research. Of course, it's very important at the education level. It's students need to know all the fundamental research, because that is why taxpayers' money is being spent there, so that they actually learn and understand these fundamentals. But the point is, if you go too far, then it is very difficult for these people to transition into an employment, because when they come into employment, it's like a different world for them. So somebody is going to ask, you should have done this yesterday. So these guys are getting confused, because life science research is always time consuming. So why are people pressurizing on time? Because obviously there is a cost of capital. So they have not really understood the time value of money. In 7 years, most of the life science students do not know in 7 years, you are actually money's value loses almost by half. Essentially, if you have 1 rupee today, it is 50 paise in 7 years. Are we teaching these things to the life science people? No. If they understand the value of money, I'm very sure that they will really do a very economical, frugal resource research, as well as they will be able to deliver things on time. So that's number one. Number two, if you really look at in terms of fundamental skills, we found fundamental skills seriously lacking even at the level of IITs, because the problem is, many of them, they have instruments, which is fine, but at least the basics and fundamental skills in terms of, for example, if you're going to catch someone saying, hey, why are you adding the cesium chloride? What's the difference between page and SDS page? We found that very seriously lacking. I think it's either a Google-based kind of reproduction that they're trying to do. They have not really understood, or maybe we have not really taught them, our faculties haven't taught them in terms of why we are doing these things. It's more like, you go into a puja and you're doing a ritual just because a priest is asking you to do. Today, I think that's what we are seeing most of the life science students are. If they can really reason out, and these things can be solved based on curiosity. I believe if that can be, these two things can be addressed, quality of talent as well as teaching of finance, I think to a large extent will help the entrepreneurship system and ecosystem grow.
Okay, sir. So it's not just the technology or other research, along with that finances, economics, and all that.
As well as the quality, as well as curiosity, and people should know why we are doing certain things, the way in which it is done.
Definitely, sir. Of course. Since we have also talked about students and researchers, what are the actual, opportunities for the students, researchers, or early innovators in this domain? If you could share some anecdotes with us, so that they will be able to relate better with this.
Actually, it's a good question, because if you see, typically India, other than the, of course, standard academic route and postdoc and teaching, typically Indian industry has got 8 broad categories, from industry perspective. We call it biopharma, diagnostics and forensics, bioagriculture and biomarine, bio-IT, enzymes, bioindustrial, biofuels, and environmental impact companies. Now, these 8 companies are standard companies, which I think if they Google, they will also find it. But what is exciting is with synthetic biology, kind of a new technology and metabolic engineering coming in globally. If you remember the first slide that I showed, For example, I'm just going to cite 10 avenues. Let's say if that excites people who are actually listening today. Number one is durable textiles, durable polymers, washables, biodegradable. That's number one. Number two, functional colors, food colors that actually exhibits a bioactivity when it goes inside. Number three is coatings of toys, because most of the kids, they actually keep their toys in the mouth, and using this, the idea is to use sublingual delivery and to actually deliver pediatric nutrition. Number four is impact fragrances. So one that has got a therapeutic effect. And the moment you inhale, it actually cures a disease. And then five is nutritive flavors. It's not just taste, but also health. Number six is biofouling for ships to prevent the microbial growth on the hull of the ship. Number seven would be, let's say, fire retardant interior design materials for fireproof construction. Number eight is unmanned aerial vehicle fuels for transatlantic defense applications. That's a very huge area. And then, of course, the ninth area common, which is now coming up, is the gold leechers, essentially bugs that actually extract gold from the mobile phone that you and I are using now, because it's not e-waste, but it's beyond that, because mobile phones, depending upon the rates, depending upon the signals, they actually use different kind of precious metals there. And the number 10 is nuclear submarines, because nuclear submarines have got different ionizing radiations, and there are some microbes and microbial polymers that can actually absorb ionizing radiations. Now imagine, I'm just listing this 10 as an example. There are a lot more exciting areas. Unfortunately, I think student ecosystem is not being exposed to these kind of very interesting areas. I think if they're exposed, I'm sure curious, those who are curious will latch onto some of these things. And these things are highly revenue generating, or in terms of IP oriented, and they've got a lot of technological prospects ahead.
Okay, sir. Just one thing on an interesting thing which you mentioned, extraction of gold. It's not e-waste you mentioned, but then sometimes people says that it's not really economically it's not viable to do.
Yes, exactly. That is because if you're going to use a natural organism, nothing is going to be economically viable, because nature unfortunately has not survived with the human greed and need. We are probably just 10,000 years on the planet, whereas the bacteria has celebrated their 4 billionth birthday on the planet. So the point is, if you know how to engineer these bugs, how to harness their potential, of course, without being an environmental danger, if you can in a closed environment, then the whole game completely changes, because you can just turn the whole 4 billion years of evolution of the bugs for our own need, of course, very smartly, keeping all the sustainability quotient in place, so that the yield, especially of the high value metals, can completely turn around. In fact, there are 2-3 companies in Singapore and in the Southeast Asia has come up, and one in China is already working on it. And there, I think they are reasonably economical.
Okay. Since I mean, I can't really stop myself from asking this question. You mentioned about this. So here generally, the synthetic biology, we know that it answers most of the stuff, and it has emerged as an exciting and promising new research field. And it's truly interdisciplinary field. I understand that as well. But however, this synthetic biology also gives rise to, various ethical implications. So would you like to, we would like to know more about this overall ethical perspective on the synthetic biology, since there could be a GMOs and other stuff as well.
Yes, I think this is a very, very serious area, because if you really look at it from without even getting into GMO, the main problem, for instance, is that CRISPR with the designer baby genes, the work that was done in China, came under a lot of light. And the second, for example, we also know what would have happened in Wuhan Institute of Virology, because there was a 2015 Nature paper, and it is also in my LinkedIn video, the 1-hour video for those who are curious. We'll also go and see how the gain of function work was funded, and how they actually evolved a particular viral strain. And so the point that I'm trying to communicate here is, yes, like with any other technology, this technology also has got some serious issues. Now, then how do you govern it? Obviously, you govern it in 2 different ways. One is you actually, ensure that there is a regulation that is put in place whenever there is a research that translates into commercial domain, because that's when the greed starts. So that is a checkpoint that you need to monitor. Number 2, instill the kind of ethics early on into the researchers, so that the researcher themselves decides what is good to do, what is not good to do. Let's say if you're fixing a disease, very good. Are you going to create a bug to trigger off a next bio war? is really worth it, because obviously we are part of the ecosystem. If we destroy the ecosystem, we'll be destroyed as well. I think that kind of a concept needs to be etched into the minds very early on when we actually teach this research. And of course, the later level regulators needs to be more mature. But at the same time, too many regulations will also stifle the field. So there should be a balance. And I think this, from an industry body like ABLE, we are constantly recommending in terms of the balance that is there. But of course, it's still a long way to go, at least from a global perspective.
So, okay, so since you just mentioned briefly about this regulatory thing, could you also shed some light on regulatory pitfall for this domain, biotech regulation in India, or challenges related to that?
Yeah, so there are three kinds of regulations or challenges. The first is the biodiversity regulation. So participants who are in this session, I would request, if any of them are interested, they can register for the ABLE's. ABLE is going to conduct a regulatory biodiversity session next Friday, same time, 4 o'clock. And Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan, one of the most famous lawyers, they're actually going to conduct the session, and you're going to gain more in that. So biodiversity is a very serious concern. So we have to be very careful and cognizant of what are the regulations before even we touch the first bug. So that's number one. Number two is the specific regulatory agencies, like for example, FSSAI, CDCSO, DGCI, for example, there's one for aquaculture, Central Insecticides Board. So what we are trying to do is to suggest to BIRAC so that we pool all these clusters, startup clusters like Sign and other people, so that they actually have regulatory consultants on their payroll, because startups are not able to afford these regulatory consultants because they're fairly expensive. So if the incubators can arrange and facilitate these kind of meetings and these kind of one-to-one close discussions, so in a group meeting, it's very difficult to address many of these things because they're very confidential in nature. So they need to have someone like an accountant, on one-to-one basis. These things can be done. But there's a catch here. Most of these agencies will need data from a GMP lab and all of that. Again, startups may not have money to meet these regulatory data requirements. So the idea is BIRAC has also started a new Central Insights Engine, and the many other places it's coming up. So wherein startups can economically generate these things. So that is also coming up. Now, third is, let's say, local state clearances. Like, for example, in Tamil Nadu, getting a pollution control board, takes approval for quite some time. So these are done again by the local compliance officer. For example, if Maharashtra has got local state compliances, first of all, the incubator should be aware. And then, because obviously you have more than 100 different rules. So, and then we have to have individual liaison officers on the incubator's payroll so that it can actually help the entrepreneurs. So this way, it will help the life science entrepreneurs to come out of the maze. Unfortunately, Pranita, most of the incubators themselves are not aware of the entire maze of all the rules and regulations. Anytime, in a license Raj, anybody can come and catch. So online and all is fine in the early on, but later on, if somebody wants to, it's very similar to traffic police. If he decides to fine you, he will fine you no matter what kind of documents you have in your hand. So we need to have somebody's help to navigate through this. And I think incubators will have a major role to help the startups.
Okay, sir. We will definitely work on this particular thing which you have highlighted here. I'll connect you offline for this as well.
Sure.
I think I'll have one more question, and then I'll take up some questions from the chat box. Sure. But yes. You mentioned, because in one of the slides you mentioned about the carbon, water footprint. People generally talks about carbon footprint. So how synthetic biology can help overcome, these challenges? And if I could club it with another question, that what all precaution these startups or innovators who are working on projects, different projects, and what sort of precautions they need to take while working on such projects? And if there are any example we can relate to that, that'll be great. So.
Yeah, so in terms of the water footprint, of course, I showed you the video on the field to yield ratio. But just as an example, to produce 1 kilo of fruits and vegetables, it takes 350 liters of water. But whereas to produce 1 kg of meat, it needs 15,000 liters. And similarly, to produce one single car, it needs 4 lakh liters of water. And it's astounding. So there is a reason why large, developed economies outsource these kind of tasks to countries like emerging countries like India. It's not because they don't have the manpower, they have everything. But despite that, they are doing it because obviously they are trying to shift the water balance. But the main point is, if you really look at from a biofoundry, is what we call from a synthetic biology perspective, I think we can reduce the water footprint by 1/10,000th of the existing number. The main problem with that is obviously cost, because energy cost, power cost, they're expensive, strain maintenance is expensive. But having said this, if you're really focused on certain high value areas, I think synthetic biology will actually have a great role in terms of saving water from a long-term perspective. Now, in terms of precautions that you asked, so the main problem is, if you see many of us have this kind of a chalta hai mindset, wherein even wearing a mask, we are not very disciplined. If you really catch hold of, it's like we are wearing mask just because someone is saying it or someone has told us. We have really not understood the logic of why we have to wear a face mask. Now, the same thing goes in terms of these, because these are the people who are actually also working in the lab. So the main point is we actually show them videos of the consequences of what will happen if they do not follow certain precautions. For example, if you're working with antibiotic resistant strains, what will be the consequence? If they understand the consequence, if they see the video of the disaster that is about to unfold, then I think that fear forces them to really follow most of the precautions. So that is one way to really ensure that these rules are followed.
Okay. So, sir, I think I'll take few questions. I'll unmute few participants here
sure.
So that they can ask. I think we will go ahead with Dr. Sudhakaram Iyer. Sir, Dr. Sudhakaram, you can answer you can go ahead and. Dashrath, could you please?
Yes.
Unmute him. I'm not able to do that.
It's already unmute. Sir, unmute from yourself.
Sorry. So,
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Sudhakaram. You would be able to unmute yourself and you would be able to ask questions. Okay, probably we'll go ahead. I think we'll go ahead with the Diksha. Diksha, can you unmute yourself and ask question?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Pranita, for unmuting me. And thank you, sir, for such a nice and insightful session. And we got to know a lot of things. So I have a couple of questions, and if time allows, I'll ask all of them. So I'll start with one of my first of the questions is that since you also mentioned that you also had a startup where you provided synthetic biology as a service, which you called a SaaS. So my idea is to provide bioinformatics services as services. So is it very much essential to commoditize these services into a product and come up with a platform, or we can a startup providing such services is also sustainable?
So it's a great question, but it is also depending on your strengths. For example, if you're going to talk about customized services, it depends upon what kind of problems you solve for your customer. Each problem of each customer will be very unique.
Yes.
So that is something, because you cannot solve all the problems. You have to be very upfront. So typically you can take about a week or 10 days or a month to do a feasibility study, and you can go back and tell them whether you can solve or not solve.
Yes.
And if you can solve, what is the cost and time? Now, from a commodity thing, then it becomes more like a product, right? You actually build a software or a tool, etc. And if you have such tool or software, then it's more like selling that tool to those who have the pain points. But what is important is that what is the pain point of the customer you're trying to solve, and whether you have the ability to solve it. If you can map these two, I think you can pick whatever, you may not pick all the area, but pick one of the areas where you can 100% you can deliver.
Yeah, and so in the addition, I would like to ask that. So since so let's say, for example, we have picked up genomics as the pain point, that there are a lot of NGS based analysis being done and experiments being done. So let's say we focus on those customers. So how to get early adopters or customers? Because we are new in business, we may have let's say years of experience as researchers. I personally have years of experience of a bioinformatics researcher, but I am very much new to business. So how can I get that?
So Diksha, let's do this. Actually, there are, in fact, many people in Pranita also asked me for another context, is investment as well as business, right? Both these things happen with only familiar people. I do not want to do business with some Diksha whom I have not even met.
Exactly.
This is normal.
Yes.
Now, obviously, if you have not met yesterday, it is fine. But today, let us say I've met Diksha, number one. Number two, let's say, how will I know Diksha? Let's say, am I meeting her at a regular frequency? Is this Diksha coming and constantly, let's say, trying to, present to me different things? How will, or let's say, is Diksha connected to others? Very similar to how LinkedIn works. So typically, what happens is most customers, they give business only to familiar people. Now, to familiarize yourself, how to break this jinx? So you have to be part right from early on, both from investment as well as business, several associations and groups in your own network. For example, some may not be relevant network, some may be relevant network. For example, if you really look at this is the reason why I'm saying Able is one example. Most of the people, 99% may not be useful to you. But the point is, just because you have to constantly, send newsletters, send your presence saying something is going on via these people, that is number one. Number two, there are certain local networks like TIE, like CAI, many of those things which actually help you, local networks at your level. That is for local connect. Now, from the global connect perspective, there are several bioinformatics association perspectives which charge you small amount of money. You have to shop. Let's say if there are 500 associations, you have to shop for the least cost and maximum impact. And constantly, you have to advertise yourself in a very subtle way saying, hey, I'm there. So that kind of a networking is very important before someone even calls you up. Now, it may take 6 months, 8 months, 1 year. The sooner you do it, the better it is. So this is very important before you get your first customer.
And one last question is that, so when we are starting, we have an idea, we are planning to build maybe a platform, or we have an idea of a service, when is the best time to go for fundings? At the idea stage, or we should at least have some first the early adopters or customers?
As long as you can get grant and you can build some POC, etc., that is good enough, number one. Number two, once you have your POC, once you have got the basic, things come in, see, nobody wants you to experiment with their money, right? So that's what defines customers. So the best thing is to see if you can, if the particular commodity is monetizable, you look at kind of a soft loan from government, and various other government branches are there which will give you soft loan for 5% or 6% interest.
Yes, sir.
What is important is you have to be very, very confident in terms of what is the value you are serving. So this is not the typical Excel sheet that you actually make in a computer or in a Google based search, but you should understand actually the value monetization of your product. So to typically do it, the moment you speak with an accounts person, you will clearly figure out where you stand, because they are the ones who are going to value your company, right? The typical auditors, the chartered accountants, and all of those people. If you find they are not really understanding your valuation, that means you're not able to communicate. So that's number as a yardstick. Now, coming back to the second point in terms of the actual grants. So please look for global challenges, because there are many big data challenges that are also being sponsored globally. So these kind of challenges, if you participate, you may fail in 100. But at least I encourage my entrepreneurs, in a period of 3 years, they have to show me, they have to keep me posted every month or every year, how many challenges they're participating, how many they failed, why they failed. So I really want them to, apply for 100. And I want them to, even if you fail in 99, it's fine with me, but you will succeed in 1. So that will give you the enough runway so that you can build your next tool. But you have to have a very clear financial plan in terms of where you're going to.
Yeah. That sounds good. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for this answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Diksha.
Sir, good evening, Dr. Pranita. This is Sudhakaran.
Okay.
Dr. Sudhakaran.
Okay.
Yeah, a couple of questions to Dr. Sriram, sir. Yes. Good evening, Dr. Sriram, sir, and thank you so much for such a detailed presentation and a lot of information you have given on synthetic biology and its future. A couple of questions. One is that some of the funding avenues which you have mentioned, like the Innovation Voucher Program and various other funding agencies, even the awareness with the funding agency itself on synthetic biology is not this adequate as it should have been there. So how will they be convinced to extend the funding support to the any of the startups if they want to venture out in this area? So that is one question. And my second question is that with regard to regulatory affairs, any norms already has been laid on by the government of India or state governments, or it is still under the frameworks being done?
Yeah, both excellent question, Dr. Sudhakaran. So the first one is in terms of, yes, you are right. Right now, the ecosystem is maturing, as Dr. Pranita was asking early on. Now, from a maturing ecosystem, it's like changing tires of a moving car. So we can't stop the car. Now, how will you change the tires? It's very difficult, right? So that's what we are trying to do. So what we try to do is we look at ecosystems where things are matured, people understand. So for example, if there is an investor who understands our funding in Singapore, for instance, who understands the space, we go there. If someone who understands in Hong Kong, we go there. For example, there is a specific community in Middle East which actually understands the potential. We actually try to reach out to them. Now, this is one particular possible way to actually break the jinx, because it is far easier to go and speak to someone who understands the space to raise money rather than someone who doesn't understand, who doesn't want to invest. Now, with regard to the regulations, see, globally, there are several markets open. So we do not look at India alone as a market, because India alone is still maturing. It takes some time. So we look at, for example, US. US is pretty much fine with the GMO products. It's got various other openness to it. Canada is fine. So there are several other areas which are actually open for these synthetic biology products. So we obviously chase those markets.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Sudhakaran, for participating. So we have Avik Chakraborty here. He's from IIT Roper Incubation Center.
Depending on the stage and they decide. So we can just talk.
Just Pranita.
Hello.
Yeah, Avik. Okay. Hi, Avik. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much. Sir, it was a wonderful session and thank you so much for inviting me. Swati, thank you so much. And I have a question regarding fresh minds getting into the startup scenario. And one of the main issues that we are discussing is that the ecosystem that we currently have is not as mature. So what we come across is people who are very interested in the technology or the product, and they don't keep an eye out for their target group. So what ends up happening is the product does not exactly fit a market gap, and eventually the product fails or partially succeeds. So one of the key factors is they have a lack of access to the demographic which their target group eventually will end up being. And it is even bigger of an issue when it comes to the sector that we are discussing, biotechnology or synthetic medicines or science. So how do you suggest that new startups get access to demographics where they can hold their pilot projects, especially in countries which are, especially in foreign countries and the global market?
See, let us take some step back. Typically, in an IAS program, I don't know, I'm not in touch with the present IAS program. Previously, when somebody is recruited as an IAS officer, he or she would be posted initially during the training period in some very remote locations where they have to really understand the nature of the people, the kind of issues that they have, how do you go about it under, of course, controlled, monitored supervision. Now, the same thing holds good if you're going to look at a defense service. Nobody's going to, the moment you become a commissioned rank officer, nobody's going to, straight away give you the charge. Obviously, you'll have to work under somebody's supervision to really go, and they'll be giving you the most difficult assignment early on. The reason why they're giving that is not to deter you, but basically to strengthen you to really understand what is going on. For example, I have seen many of these guys getting, let's say, being posted in Siachen straight away. And some of them, they actually, have frostbites also. So the reason why that is being done is that actually exposes them early, very, very early on in terms of the experience chain. Because obviously human life is very limited. So the earlier you are exposed to all of these things, the better your experience, trained neural networks are. Now, the reason why I'm saying these two comparables is because in a typical startup world, everybody is sitting inside an academic research lab, which is fine. That is, as long as you are studying, you are a student, it is fine. Nobody's going to question you. The moment you talk about entrepreneurship, you're going to talk about selling something to a customer. And that customer means it is public, just not in the four walls, right? That way, it's going to be a serious problem. Then what happens is, at least because I'm actually working with close to 100 companies along the east coast of India, and this is very quietly going on at the back end. So what we do is I actually send my entrepreneurs, the moment they actually talk about this idea, we actually spend some time looking at the right user for that particular product or service that they are trying to plan in mind. And we actually set up meetings. We actually send them. It can be a remote community. It can be a scientific community. It can be anything. We actually ensure that they meet at least 10 different set of communities, and each of them will have at least 10 to 20 customers. So they have to share with me constantly the results. And based on this, what we try to do is each time they go to a particular place, they come back with very interesting learning. Only when you go there, meet there, people will many times trash your product. They will say, already competition is there, etc. And we, in fact, also arrange meetings with the distributors, with the salespeople early on, because many of them will ask them, only one question: "Mere ko kya hai?" How much I'm going to get? No, that's a real world, right? It's commercial world. Yeah, so then these people will learn what is a commission structure, what is a distribution structure. Finally, after paying all the commission, you may end up even in a loss. So these things, we actually do it very, very early on, the moment they actually are even thinking about an idea, so that when they come back, they don't waste time, too much of time building something just inside the closed four walls, just because they have access to technology. So this process is done much, much early on. And I think to some of the incubators where I am on board, I'm actually doing this to the entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Dr. Raghavan, and thank you, Dr. Pranita, for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Avik, for joining. Let me unmute Somnath.
Hello.
Hello, so can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, so thank you for your talk. It was very informative. Sir, I just wanted to ask something. Actually, what happens after doing a PhD, we are mostly concerned with our own product. We want to develop that and all. But many a times, while starting the PhD, we didn't see that market potential or anything. Then it becomes very difficult to actually work with our own product, though we know very much about it. So in that scenario, sir, can you suggest some simple products which are very much needed in the market nowadays, biotech-based products, and people can, with small money, they can start with?
Actually, it's a great question, Somnath. So the problem is PhD or even degree, the purpose is very different. Obviously, you have to get your degree, right? So that is why you are actually working on that area and you have to publish a paper and you have to finish it. Now, if you see 99.2% of the patents and 99.98% of the published literature never gets translated to consumer products. If you take a step back in terms of what Steve Jobs did, he did not invent anything. He only innovated. What's the difference between invention and innovation? Invention is something which you do in the lab, like what you rightly said in terms of PhD, right? So you actually file a patent. Now he, in fact, even before Steve Jobs introduced iPhone, touchscreen was known. His graphical user interface was already developed by Microsoft. A lot of these things were done. What Steve Jobs did is he accumulated all these patents, managed a way to innovate something to actually ensure that some customer pain point is addressed. And to address this, he himself did a lot of survey with several consumers in terms of getting the feel what is their actual pain point. Now remember, he did not ask them, this is the solution, will the solution work? No, he only found out the pain point. And he went and looked at the technology, he found the solution, and then he said, look, he packaged it in such a way that is very attractive to them. For example, do I need an iPhone? No, I'm fine with Nokia 1100. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with the Nokia phone. But then he packaged it in such a way that he actually made it very desirable. So there are three elements that I've cited here. Number one, what is the methodology of converting an invention into an innovation? Number two, this involves understanding some consumer or customer pain point. That's very important. Number three, how do you package it in such a way that is desirable to the consumer? Now, if you're going to expose biotech, maybe probably the 75 participants who are still remaining on the call, even in there, for example, 90% may leave. In fact, 1% already left as and when I'm saying. So the point is that is the interest level that people will have. So forget about all other external communities. Nobody's going to even listen to it. But if you package it, let's say, for example, the typical branding is done. So if you look at Coca-Cola, you know that it's absolutely toxic concoction of chemicals. But the packaging and marketing is done such a way. Now, you don't need to spend huge amount of money in branding. You don't need to spend crores like big companies. But are you able to communicate like how a TED speaker talks? You can actually train upon yourself. Number one. Number two, if you cannot do it, please also always hire someone. Let's say you can insist upon incubator like Sign or your own incubator wherever you're associated to see if they can actually connect you with some kind of a cost-effective resource person who can actually nicely communicate and put a story, because people buy stories. So if you can communicate your biotech, whatever service or product, into a story form to the consumer, I'm sure that is a good starting point. And remember, last point, you may have to again reach 1,000 customers. You have to reach over 1,000 customers, potential customers, of which the conversion is probably 10%. So if you need at least 100 consumers, you have to actually talk to 1,000 customers with all these things having right.
Yes. Thank you very much, sir. So in the chat box, can you give your email ID so that we can contact you?
Yeah, sure. She can pass on the email and you can reach out.
Sure. Yes. Thank you very much, sir.
I'll do that, Somnath. Yeah. Thank you for joining us today. We have one more hand raised, Mr. Sankara. Yeah.
Hi.
Please.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. So in the equity, so how the dilution will take place, like from A, series A to B, B to C, and how much the founder will get? So what is the typical scenario in the equity funding, and what is the logic in the dilution of the fund in the equity?
So this is a great question, and this is a case-by-case answer. And typically, to answer this question, people charge crores of rupees even in consultancy. So you asked such a most important question. That is because it is absolutely case-to-case basis. So this is more like negotiating in a typical vegetable market. So let's say the same 1 kilo of, let's say, brinjal, someone says 100 rupees. How you negotiate and get is solely up to you. So typically investors will ask 10 rupees per kilo. You will say 200 rupees per kilo. And then how do you come to a common ground and negotiation? There are a lot many parameters. I think if you have a very clear-cut, financial plan, this is something which you should actually work out with your auditors.
Great.
Thanks, Sankara. Sir, there are few questions in the chat box, but I have one question here for you. So generally, we have seen that this industrial biotechnologies, synthetic biology area, it's typically a male-dominated area. And so I would like to know what is your opinion on these women entrepreneurs in this industrial biotechnology area, and any suggestions or guidance for navigating them, if you have.
Actually, thanks for introducing me to my other role that I'm doing as business advisor to Golden Jubilee Biotech Park, which is basically the first biotech park set up in the country 20 years back. And this fundamental idea is to focus only on women entrepreneurship in life sciences, because there are two difficult challenges. Life science itself is difficult. Women entrepreneurship has got another challenge. If you combine two different challenges, it's got a thing on its own. We really have a unique problem. Now, this particular park has got a very unique model wherein women entrepreneur walks in with an idea, utilizes a Bionest facility where all the instrumentation, everything is there, builds the POC, then goes on to take 1,000 square feet facility, and then does the prototyping, and then obviously he or she goes in terms of building their own, taking their own land. Now, this is the only park which also gives land, to the entrepreneurs to build their own factory or facilities. Now, in the last 20 years, I think there are more than 500 successful stories that we have got. But what is important to note here is, the ecosystem at this point of time have got several challenges to support these women entrepreneurs. So right from their family to the markets to in terms of investors. So, these kind of women-oriented women entrepreneurship parks, they actually help a long way, because there are a lot of personal elements that are being taken care of these kind of women entrepreneurship park. I really hope that these kind of parks are replicated around the country. But those who are interested can actually visit this biotechpark.co.in to really see the kind of model that they are actually following in this area.
Sure. I think some of the participants who are here probably will definitely do that. So since we are talking about the funding opportunities, you mentioned about the grants, and a lot of researchers who are here would like to know the how they should start how they should start with the research they have done during their PhD or probably postdoc or MTech studies to for next level. And there are different kind of a grant which are available. I'm not touching upon equity based or debt or something, but the grants, because they're starting with it'll be a good idea for them to avail different grants from different government agencies. And I'll specifically I'm asking you in terms of BIRAC, because there are different funding opportunities available for bio related area. One is industrial biotechnology, and as you are an expert review member of the BIRAC ecosystem, you have participated in various meetings, review meetings and all. So what are the key criteria, sir, which these people should have to get through the BIG? If you can advise them about how to submit the application, what are the key points they should remember while writing such applications or even preparing for such review meeting, panel meeting?
It's such an important point. If you see out of the 90 participants, we only have 66 participants at this point of time. So which means the remaining people, which is very good, that they are not interested in BAG. And the lesser people, it is good for us, because in BAG we don't like competition, because there's already so much of competition, which is very good. Now coming back on a lighter vein, if you really see two parts to it, people try, as you rightly pointed out, they want to convert this PhD into something usable. Need not necessarily be, because many times a PhD has got a very different purpose. The moment we try to do, we are actually throwing good money after bad money. So I think people should be very clear with this. If there is no commercial need, PhD is done with a very clear goal of getting a degree. That's all, finished. Just because I went to a school and I'm getting LKG learned, I cannot try to market this LKG ABCD book to a larger audience. That LKG ABCD book is just for me to learn ABCD. That's all. We have to leave it at it. So I think when people try to carry this PhD too much, it is basically a title, be done with it. Now, because true entrepreneurship is a very, very different game. This is a life or death game. You may lose things, including shirt, pant, everything. So, and those who are only brave should enter entrepreneurship. Otherwise, better things, academics, and they've got different options. Entrepreneurship is not a compulsion for all. It's only for those who are curious, the bravest, those who can actually face the world. Now, of course, the most importantly is those who can face criticism. PhD gives you certain things, but you should be able to stand up to criticism. Most scientists and PhDs, they cannot withstand criticism. If public is going to actually, thrash upon the product, I am very sure that 99% of the scientists will not be able to withstand that. Anyway, so in terms of BAG, there are 4 important elements that one needs to look at it, which unfortunately, and all these four elements are not being looked at by all the people, all the applicants. What are the 4? Number 1, novelty and IP. Most of the people, they actually don't do a proper patent search. In fact, freedom to operate, something called freedom to operate, which I think if you consult with a patent lawyer, they will tell you, there are at least 600 to 1,000 patents existing on every single area that you actually think. Because whatever you can think of, somebody's already done it. Always keep this in mind. So if you see, nobody is doing that kind of an intense patent search, whereas a BAG reviewer, for example, BIRAG gives me the kind of all the 600 patents, whereas the applicant tells me, sir, I did all the Google search, I found 2 patents. That's very funny because I have 600 and the applicant tells me 2. So that shows that the applicant is not curious, so we reject straight. Mentally we reject, no matter how interesting is the presentation. So number 2 is, what is the initial data? Now, many people have asked me, sir, BAG is only for POC. So you notionally are supposed to give me money to generate the data. That is true, but there is so much of competition today that we actually have other applicants who have in fact almost done the project. So when there is a limited pool of money, when we have, let's say, a limited set of applicants that we can pick off, and if here is a team which has almost done most of the data, they are actually presenting the entire full suite of data. And here is a person who's saying that they have not done anything. It's very unfair, but of course the rule of rule will shift in terms of those who have actually done the data. So you have to have some kind of a data, and that data actually should be the validating data is what we call, should be in the annexure at least, and definitely reviewers will want the data. Number 3 is the teams and the team and advisors. At least the advisors should be from a reputed area, from the area where the person is applying. If they do not have 1 or 2 reputed faces, which are well-known faces, then it becomes a problem, because in the whole research that he or she has done, there is a credibility that comes into question. Number 4 is the ability to present a storyline in 180 seconds, just the unmet need and solutions. We often find many times people, they go haywire here and there. In 180 seconds, 3 minutes, can you really tell what is the problem, what is the solution? Because most of this BAG review starts with morning 8:30 and it goes all the way till night 8:30. 12 hours, these reviewers are sitting before a computer. They are actually hearing to stories after stories. They are basically fatigued, right? Mentally they're fatigued, and even more fatigued in this era of virtual presentation. So most of these reviewers are maybe, let's say, above 50 and all of that. So it's very important to very quickly say what is the problem and solution, and how is our kind of science really helping in the solution. And then they will ask you the data. You obviously have to present. But the first 3 minutes are very important. If we can get these 4 right, there is at least 50 to 60% chance that we will actually win the grant.
Okay, I think you have summarized it so well. So I think these the people who would like to apply for BIG or any such grant, like biotechnology ignition grant, why I've mentioned it's a very early biotech stage funding, and it is it's kind of a huge grant to start with. 50 lakhs, and it's just for the establishment of the proof of concept for your idea. So, but even if I mention idea, the way sir said that some sort of a data is required because it's such a competitive grant. So reviewers would like to see some kind of a proof.
I will give you one simple example. When we started off, I think we had a peak of about 94 participants, the participants. So I'm carefully monitoring it. And if you see the 30 participants who came in and went, that means that they are not curious. They're basically coming for just for the sake of attending, or they may have other compelling needs. But from a reviewer perspective, we constantly monitor everything and we make our own decisions. So that is the curiosity, and that is something that we actually want to see.
Yeah, and you have really 8 minutes to describe everything, right from the need, unmet solution, your technology, your data, and everything. So you really have to work on it. You can even rehearse it before you actually go and present it to the panel. So that is something these people can really work on. But in terms of applications, sir, so you mentioned about novelty point and all that, but there are so many other sections. How important they are? I mean, you just really looked into these few sections, or the work plan which is laid out
No,
later on?
there are two parts. One is the actual, the non-presentation, wherein the application is screened at the jury level. There, it is more in terms of communicating, in terms of primarily it is novelty, because the most important element that people see is novelty. They actually take the title and they actually look at the content, they Google it, and if they find some other patent, something else having it, I think straight away the mindset is basically to reject, because each of the reviewer has got their own number of proposals to go through. They've got other works also to do. So there, novelty is very, very important. At least in some element of using the technology and applying some element of novelty, the person should be able to bring to the table and also highlight this novelty very effectively. Not in some corner of the page, but most importantly in the relevant sections. Preferably in the beginning opening section itself. We can say that 6,000 patents are already there, but what I'm presenting is completely, totally unique, and what is the uniqueness? And straight away, it's good to state that. Now, in terms of presentation, that's a very different ballgame. So there, it's more in terms of the data and the science that actually speaks. In terms of the storyline is important, but novelty is important. But what is the data that you are actually having? So if the data is really not sound enough, and if the data is not there, straight away it's gone. But if data is not in line with the proper science, then I think because people, let us look at who are the people who are evaluating BAG. It's basically scientists, right? They're not entrepreneurs. Yeah. Maybe one or two entrepreneurs, very rarely they come, but they are core scientists. 95% they are scientists. What will scientists do? They will evaluate what they know best, which is science. So if the data is not in line with the core science in their specific area, then the probability of getting across is very remote.
But do you also feel that, sir, when we are mentioning about data and the scientists and all, they should also, these people while applying, they should also look into the business aspect, right? Like how this idea.
No, business is fine. No, the business aspect is fine. And in fact, in many applications, they are actually doing their best. But if the science, the business aspect is not being evaluated, at least when they are presenting, they will ask some questions. They will ask, which I think most of the entrepreneurs, of course, they should be prepared, as you rightly said, Pranita. But the main point is they will definitely ask people to go to the annexure slide and show the data that they have. Yeah. So straight away, they will say, please go to annexure slide. And the annexure slide, if the data is not good, then it's a problem. Or let's say if they have got some borrowed images, some plagiarized statement, etc. Because these are very, very experienced scientists. They can actually catch them in probably 5-6 seconds. They're very, very fast. And if they catch that, then the whole credibility goes. Then no matter what people speak about business and everything does, it falls into deaf ears.
And then you also mentioned about the FTO. I understand, sir, this freedom to operate is so important. And there is a specific question in the application itself. But then for these entrepreneurs or maybe the researchers, starting with, going with the IP agent, doing the FTO could be a bit expensive thing. I mean, it may cost them to.
That is exactly the reason, Pranita, where we are requesting all the incubators to have kind of IP license officers for statutory and all of them on their payrolls. So again, they don't need to pay them constantly, but I think kind of a honorarium or kind of flexible consultancy work practices, because these are very important for the incubators to have. And it is not just the chairs, tables, benches, and some freezers and all of that. These are also important, which I think right now, at least from my side, I'm trying to push it through ABLE and also into government. That is very important that incubators be given some small amount of budget, wherein they can hire these kind of people on their payrolls and pay them as and when they use. Now, that is number one. Number two, many of these, if the entrepreneurs set up a company, many of them are not aware that if they get a DAPP number, of course, now they have got DPIT, 80% of their cost of filing a patent is subsidized. Now, while in the process, of course, with not any other patent attorney, there is a list of patent attorneys given in the DAPP site. You have to go only through them. And those people, I think, if you go and meet them, build a relationship, they actually tell you quietly, they will say, oh, you are a very aspiring entrepreneur. You are not in the, you don't have the kind of money to pay, but they are willing to help in terms of finding out, look, these are all the problems you have. These are all the limitations in the freedom. So, how are you going to work on it? But that actually happens by relationship. You have to find the person, go there, speak there, or let's say build a relationship network, and then the person helps. Normally, if you are just going to talk to somebody, you will actually get a bill, and that bill will be invoice will be very huge, which entrepreneur cannot pay.
Yes, definitely, sir. I think on the same line, we have one question in the chat box, sir, from the Ranjit, who is asking that they don't we don't want to publish or to patent our developed research protocols, because we want to keep it as keep the idea as a trade secret for future commercialization. Probably, maybe they are thinking that the patent is open, goes into open source or open domain after 20 years. So they would like to keep it as a trade.
No, I think it's a great question. So I saw it. So actually every business, it's a good question. So every business has got two things. One is something which is proprietary, which is what we call it trade secret. One is something which is an IP. Now, including large pharmaceuticals, if you try to simply follow their patent and reproduce something, you cannot exactly reproduce what they have actually got it. This everybody knows. So patents are basically, written by, smart, cunning lawyers deliberately to really do this. That is a business of writing patents. Now, the point is, unfortunately, the moment you talk about grants are given by an agency for a specific purpose. If you are going to get it from a government grant, it is taxpayers' money. And the government grant needs to show something in reciprocation. Obviously, what is the asset that they can show? They cannot show a startup company as an asset because the company sometimes yet to form, maybe just one single researcher is there. So there should be a common platform so that they actually, let us say when the Controller and Auditor General's office audits the kind of crores that is spent on the BAG grant or any government grant, what will these people answer? So they have to say, look, I spent this money and this is what I got back. What did I get back? So this IP is a kind of an asset because obviously this is all intangible asset, right? So IP is the only asset that they can show back to the, the Controller and Auditor General's office. So for this much of crores, this is a kind of an IP estate I built. And that is a key reason that people are insisting for novelty, FTO and IP and all of that. Now, in terms of, there are certain private philanthropic institutions which do not need all this IP. For example, there are 160 or more philanthropic institutions. Unfortunately, I think our folks are still hung up on just BAG and DBT because it is popularized. How many of these people on this audience really know about all this 160? They have to Google. Obviously, nobody is going to spoon feed them and give because they're all researchers, right? So they have to go beg, borrow, steal, whatever it is. They have to figure out what is this 165, institutional philanthropic agencies which do not need patent, which do not need any of these things. Hard scientists will not evaluate as long as they can actually create a social impact purely for the country. For example, if I have got a product to help Africa, which obviously will help in India, or let's say, for example, in Vietnam, definitely those agencies will help because I know there's an agency in Vietnam which will help. There are several agencies in Africa related products, they will help. And eventually, if I build a product for Africa, it will help India also. But truly social global impact, they only look at it. They don't look at anything. They don't ask you any question. And these grants start anywhere between $50,000 to $250,000, even $500,000. I am not talking about the award. I'm not talking about the kind of Y Combinator and all of those accelerators. I'm purely talking about public philanthropic institutions which actually give these grants. So please explore these grants and apply.
Yes. We have.
But there again, Pranita, if they really apply in the BAG style, it doesn't work. Each of the institutions, the focus metric is different. Please read the focus metric and apply. Thank you.
Yeah. That is actually very important point here. So every scheme actually is targeted to support something, some unique thing, right? And you have to apply appropriately, looking at the scheme, what are the mandate of the scheme, and then you should apply. So your chances of getting selected in that scheme.
Actually, Pranita, the example that I give to my entrepreneurs is like, imagine you as a shopkeeper, let's say Kirana store shopkeeper. Many customers are going to walk in. These customers are the funding agencies or equity investors, etc. Let us say one customer comes and buys, let us say, a tomato. Another customer may not buy the same tomato, right? He's going to ask you for, potato. He's going to ask you for, let's say, shampoo. You cannot, just because you sold tomato to the previous customer, you cannot put the same kind of parameters to them. So every customer is unique.
Yeah. So, sir, there is question in the chat box. If you have an idea that has no proof of concept yet, but is feasible theoretically, how can you approach for funding? I think one thing which we have really mentioned is BIG, but there also reviewers are currently looking at some sort of a data which can at least support the theory or whatever you are saying. But there are other grants also available, right? From DST, Department of Science and Technology.
Correct. But at this point of time, in those cases, what is best idea is to associate the person should be associated with an academic faculty. And if you apply through the faculty, then it is possible because the money goes to the institution to develop that POC. Then once you develop POC, the institution files the patent with that faculty whom you are applying with the grant. And then eventually, if you win BAG, the patent will be licensed into the company that we are going to form. So that route will actually save the individual from this directly going and applying for the grant.
Yes, yes. So I think there is one question where you have to actually wear a hat of investor now. So synthetic biology, unlike IT, has higher risk and higher break-even times. Where do you see Indian investors and their level of participation into this higher risk startup?
See, I think very similar to what Dr. Sudhakaran asked earlier. I think people shouldn't be really looking only at India. So this world has got 220 countries to the last count that I have, out of which I think more than 10 to 15 countries are actually, have got markets for it. And many of them are low-hanging markets, where we can actually quickly, go and make money. A smart entrepreneur is not, it's like say there is a traffic jam, in the road. How do I drive on the traffic? No, why are we taking our vehicle, going through the same route? Google is telling you, showing you the red bar, there is a traffic jam. The first instinct, even before you start from your home, either you start a little bit late, or let's say you try to look at bypass. Many times there are a lot of bypass and many other geographies that are there. Now, India is a very good place where you can actually make things happen in terms of, manufacturing, or let's say, doing an experiment, because they are reasonably cost effective here. But having said this, the actual market for them will be in very different geography. So what do? Obviously, we go to Israel because Israel is one common area where it doesn't cost much to set up a company. Israel is an ecosystem which is very developed. So many of my entrepreneurs, they actually set shop in Israel. And Israel is a good gateway for the global investors. It's kind of neutral territory. And it's just probably 4 or 5 hours from India. And your lab will be in India, but your front end will be in Israel. Through Israel, you access the whole world. So that's how you actually break this jinx, so that you don't, keep banging at Indian investors all the time. To a large extent, I think we should let them be in their own area and we should move on with our lives. Pranita, you're on mute. Pranita, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. We'll just take one question from the chat box. We're about to, we are almost at 5:13. So Javed Sheikh here mentioned that initial data collection for purposes of grant presentation is often costly, especially for startups without a lab setup. Is there any financial or infrastructure support for such startup? So if I could add something here before I pass this question to you.
Yes.
So let's say for example, there are, again, I'm going to the government schemes again. There are from BIRAC, there are SIPs or fellowships are available, or from DST, there are entrepreneurs in residence. Okay. Fellowships are available, or some Kickstart grant. Maybe sometime it is from 1 lakh to 5 lakh or up to 7 lakh. These grants are available where you get a small amount of money and you can do all these activities with that. So let's say you are an undergraduate, then there are different programs. If you are a if you are in graduation, there are different programs. If you are a postgraduate, there are different programs. So there are schemes where you can apply depending on at what stage you are, and with the small amount of funds you can work on these points, so that when you are going to approach the schemes like BIG or other seed fund or anything else, you have some sort of a work ready with you, which you can really show up there, and then increase your chances of getting such grants with the help of data which you have generated. So over to you for more.
No, I think you have answered it very effectively. Nothing to add. I think it's better to reach out to people like you so that you can actually guide them better.
Yeah, and even incubators have, sometimes they have a small funds available with them, and if the idea or the concept is really interesting,
provided the idea is not to win the Nobel Prize, because then we cannot fund such research. As long as it is affordable, I think incubators will help.
Yeah, so small funds are also available with incubators. So your idea has to or your idea or whatever concept you have, that has to be really interesting. And probably then you can reach out to, there are different incubators available.
More importantly, we have to see if the person who's having the ideas, has validated, at least by going and talking to the customer, in terms of whether that will really help them.
Yeah, exactly. And this is very important, that you have to identify your customer, talk to them, get their feedback, and then proceed further. That is very, very important. I think, sir, if we can summarize it, and if one last thing on which you can just speak about the challenges. You have already done that. I know that. Challenges, opportunities for industrial biotechnology. If you could summarize it and for the audience.
So number one is skill. Please develop your skill. We seriously find there is close to 85 to 90% of the people who have got PhD, sorry to say, at this point of time, I don't think in my industries, my companies, they are not directly employable without a detailed training, and we don't have our startups trying to train them. So please develop your skill in terms of knowing, understanding why you're doing the experiment for what. So that's number one. Number two, before we embark on any such idea, first of all, figure out whether somebody actually needs it. And if nobody needs it, how are you going to at least brand it or market it or, tell a story so that someone will actually want it? If none of these apply, then please do not, spend more time on it because it's waste of time. Number three, please do not go just because somebody is, always trying to look at BIG and these kind of conventional thing. Please do not just go one way. Please look around you. There are several avenues and opportunities. If you have the right product market fit, there are several avenues on open, including 160 other. And immediately don't ask me the Excel sheet. Even if I have, I will not give because I have to really see the kind of durability and kind of curiosity that you have. So that is something which I think if people develop, and I think there is a very bright career ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for this. So summarizing for our audience. I think with this, I'll just highlight one point here for people who are still here, participants. We have talked about biotechnology ignition grant, but there are in BIRAC as well, there are other grants as well. For commercialization, there is a LEAP seed fund is available. Then there is an incubator seed funds are also available for you to work on your ideas. You can approach the incubator. So there are different funding besides what sir has already explained. And for this biotechnology ignition grant, which is from a BIRAC, which is a early stage funding to establish the proof of concept for your technology product, whatever. So you get around 50 lakhs rupees for this. And the call for this is going to, generally opens twice a year in January and July. We don't have currently any visibility that whether it will open in July or not because of the pandemic, things are getting delayed. But it generally opens twice a year in January and July. So do approach incubators, do approach Sign. Sign is a BIG partner for this. And you can write to us. I'll just flash one slide here to give you the to give you the email addresses on which you can reach out to us. So for BIG grant, please do write to us on sign_BIG@signiitb.org. And if you have any interesting idea or work which you are doing as a startup or innovators and you would like to take incubation at Sign, please do reach out to us on incubation@signiitb.org. And do apply for these BIG grant, which the call for which will be open soon, and do write to us for the same, and we will help you provide the mentoring, preparing applications. We have experts like Dr. Sriram Raghavan in our network who offers coaching or mentoring such startups or innovators. So with this, I think I'll just stop share here, and thank you so much, sir.
I thank all the 60 attendees who are still there. So thank you all so much for your time, and thanks for listening, and thanks Pranita for the excellent work you've done in terms of putting this together. Have a nice evening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you for your time, and thank you all for joining here. And